If you do music your whole life, particularly piano playing, but singing was helpful too, it keeps your brain really active. That then in turn might reduce your risk for developing dementia later on. So everybody should go and play their instruments.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Kremen. We're really lucky to have you here and really grateful for your time. So you are the director of the Behavioral Neurology Program and leader of the Goldrich Clinical Trial Program at the Goldrich Center for Alzheimer's and Memory Disorders. And that's at Cedars-Sinai. And you're also an HFC Science Advisor. So we're so lucky to have you.
We were kind of talking about, how hard it can be to get a diagnosis. You take your loved one into their primary care physician and they're like, seems fine. No problems here. And often the loved one can see there are changes. So talk about the importance of an early diagnosis, getting a diagnosis.
Yeah.
So important.
It's so important because it opens up the door to getting help.
Yeah, right.
Neurologically, supportive care, support groups, just everything. Future care planning, like while somebody is still able to really have an idea of what they want, it's important for them to be able to tell their loved ones, here, this is how I'd like to be taken care of in the future if I'm not able to say that. Sometimes when there is actually something brewing, looking forward, it's kind of hard to know, right? It's like after the diagnosis has been made and it's really obvious looking backwards that you're sort of like, oh, actually that's when it started. So that's part of the hurdle, right, is knowing that this is something that's actually not normal. And I think the second thing is like the family, or the person themselves, either they're scared or they don't, the family members, they notice, but they don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or when they talk about it, it becomes a source of tension. And so that's kind of hard to even get somebody to the doctor. And then when they go to primary care, again, primary care doctors are really busy and they're trying to do everything in a very short visit. So really it comes on the family to sort of say, no, I do think that there's something going on, and maybe they can ask the primary care doctor, hey, could I just come back and could we just talk about this? And that way that, they could set aside the time and they could actually do, some sort of evaluation that's longer than 3 questions, remember them, come back.
I'm so glad you talked about reminding families that they could ask for another appointment with their primary care physician. Because so many families don't know that that's an option, right? And so to really, I think our role as an organization is to give people the information that they can and should be advocating for themselves and for their family members. How does access to healthcare or socioeconomic status impact the prevalence and management of Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah, that's a really, really important factor in, who is at risk and why. I mean, there's many factors, again, so many factors, but really we know that from the beginning, just like having access to healthcare, access to education from the very beginning really does set the stage for the rest of your life. Access to proper healthcare, same thing. Because what we know is that high blood pressure, having diabetes, having obesity, having high cholesterol, all these things contribute to increased stroke, increased heart attack, and vascular disease in your brain. So that's already contributing to increased risk for dementia. And there is a link between your vascular health and Alzheimer's disease as well. If you don't have access to health care, then this stuff is sitting unattended to. And therefore, you see greater risks, unfortunately, in people who don't have access to care, or in communities where there might be medical care desert, or they can't afford it, unfortunately. And yes, that just is going to increase the risk. So we really need to focus on how do we get health care to all groups of people, all communities, all colors and backgrounds, because everybody deserves to be able to prevent their dementia risk, all of them.
We here at HFC do a lot of work as far as educating young people, or anyone of any age, about the things they can do to keep their brain healthy. I think a lot of people don't even realize that they can do that. So tell us a bit about why reducing your risk is so important.
Right. So there was a paper that came out in about 2018, and then they revised it in 2020. And basically they looked at risk over the course of lifetime, how you can reduce your risk. And it turns out that at least 40% of our risk is modifiable. So it's not like, you're born and there's nothing you can do and, oh, my grandparents or my parents had dementia and so I guess that's what's going to happen to me also. No, it isn't set in stone. And basically what we know is that there are certain things, for example, earlier in life we know that getting education can reduce your risk later on, decades later, by 7%, right? Then in midlife, we know that there are things that are very important. So reducing obesity, reducing your cholesterol, managing your blood pressure, checking your hearing. These things are very important too. And then later in life, we know that reducing social isolation, taking care of mental health like depression and anxiety, making sure again that somebody can hear, that they can see, and even air pollution. All these things are super important. And it all adds up, right? Every little thing. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't say exercise. So we know that exercise really is important. And so if you start early and really get those habits early, right? Exercise daily, knowing that that's good for your physical health, your mental health, and you carry that forward your whole life along with a healthy diet and getting sleep, that's really setting yourself up to be able to really change the needle on, if you have these other risk factors that you can't avoid, you really need to give your body all the tools so you can stay in the world. Right. And even when you have dementia, we still want you to stay in the world. It's not like you get a diagnosis and you're going to retreat. No, right. You don't retreat. We're supposed to figure out how can we keep you living? How can we do these things? If you need hearing aids, let's get them. If you're bored, let's figure out what you're going to do. Let's keep you engaged socially and everything, because it's not a time to give up. It's a time to keep living as a human and as well as you can for as long as possible.
So Alzheimer's obviously is a disease that affects the brain. What are some of the early signs and symptoms that perhaps a loved one should be on the lookout for?
Sure. So a lot of times it could be word finding, but again, we all have word finding, so I don't want people to get really upset or scared, right? But sometimes it can be word finding, and then it can develop into more things like that. So not being able to call something the right thing, right? And that happens all the time. It's consistent. It's not, just, once in a blue moon. Somebody who's repeating themselves, so repeating stories, or asking repetitive questions like, what are we doing today? And then, a little bit later, what are we doing today? Forgetting conversations or events that happened recently, getting lost in a parking lot more than usual.
I always heard that everyone forgets where they parked at the mall. It's right. When you forgot that you drove there in the first place.
Yes, exactly.
That you should be, perhaps right. visiting your doctor.
Right. Yeah. It's a balancing act of trying to figure it out. But I think that if you're seeing that somebody is just not up to par, if you're seeing that the things that they have been skillful their whole lives and they're just a little bit less sharp and a little bit off, it's time to, just kind of get a checkup.
We've been doing a thing, HFC in one word. Okay. I went with hope. Bonnie went with inspirational. HFC in one word to you.
Educational.
Oh, good one. Yeah. And my mom was a teacher, so if she would want HFC to be one thing, she would want it to be educational. So.